Okay, so the police and the Marines are going to search your compound. Is there anything dangerous that we need to know about?
So Gretchen, welcome, and thank you so much, not only for your contribution to the book, but for agreeing to be with us and go beyond the book.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's just talk a little bit about the work that you've done. You've applied your experience to focus on many different illicit networks now in a number of different places. I think we're interested in the process that you use in order to approach and analyze such complex problems and the operational environment.
When you're looking at illicit power structures and illicit networks, one thing that I have found to be very true is that we sort of see the same thing over and over again. We see networks setting themselves up in the same way, using front companies or shadow ownership of companies or other facilities that they use to illegally move money. We see corruption being the single most enabling factor for them throughout the supply chain or value chain of their activities. It is increasingly being understood the extent to which corruption represents an international security threat. It's so destabilizing globally. There are whole regions that are being chewed up by bad governance, and it contributes to the immigration crisis that we see in Europe and across Latin America and in the United States. It contributes to violence. It contributes to insurgency and terrorism and groups that are just angry about the fact that there are no jobs. It contributes to a decline in production as investors pull out of places because they're so corrupt. And I think what we're seeing in a lot of parts of the developing world is this increasingly corrupted, criminalized states. And I think one of the greatest challenges today in the international relations field is to look for success stories and to look for examples of places that have clawed themselves back from extreme levels of corruption to a cleaner form of governance. And there are not many examples. There are not many successful examples. I think the other big question is, what role does the international community play in this? Because I think the signs are there that the United States in particular has not played a positive role in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan and places like Iraq. And I personally am really concerned about what we see coming out of Arab Spring countries that have fallen apart. I think we're looking at a number of new governments and new regimes that have proven to be very, very vulnerable to corruption and to the arrival of transnational organized crime syndicates. And I think that's a very worrisome trend that we're looking at going forward. When they realize that you understand the problems that they're encountering, I find that people will open up to you. And I used to have this experience a lot in Afghanistan and Pakistan because so few people were looking into the issue of some of the illicit activities that both the Taliban and some of the more predatory commanders and regional leaders were engaging in. So when I came in and started asking them about the people who were illegally charging tax on them or extorting their businesses or kidnapping their family members, they would light up with information. In some cases, it was very hard for me as a foreigner to go and talk to people. And so one of the things I learned very early on was understand when that's the case and hire a team of local researchers in to find that information out for you. If you are really in a high-risk environment or you're going after a network that is extremely powerful and dangerous, it's much better to use professional operatives in those cases than it is to try and ask people questions, because they simply won't, they'll be really risking their lives to talk to you about it. I think a lot of people in the intelligence community have become too reliant on SIGINT at the expense of actually going out and talking to real people. And you can, in my opinion, you cannot find out about illicit networks that way. You have to, and illicit power structures, because they know that people are listening. You have to go out and find out what's going on. You have to develop sources or put undercover sources into those networks. I don't think there's any other way to do it.
Where have you been wrong?
When we've had really big data dumps, we've often found a much greater degree of hierarchy than we thought existed before. I think we've also struggled with the issue of groups being placed into a certain silo. They're terrorists, or they're criminals, or they're insurgents, or they're something else. And I think it's very dangerous to silo these organizations. A lot of them don't really fit in one particular mold. And I think one of the things that was hardest for me to get my head around in Afghanistan, and now I see it all the time, so I'm more accustomed to it, is the extent to which actual battlefield enemies who are really shooting them at each other by day, or actually fighting and have been fighting for years, will nonetheless collaborate if there's money to be made over organized crime, particularly if it's very high profit like narcotics. What we often think is self-evident, because we understand these networks so well, is very hard for a lot of people to understand. And a lot of people who are policymakers or are in a position to block some kind of action against these networks want to see some kind of smoking gun. And so one of the things that I have learned the hard way is that the only thing harder than showing that the Taliban are making a huge percentage of their money from used car sales, or laundering their money through used car sales, is proving to getting a U.S. policymaker to understand that the Taliban are making their money from used car sales. So people want to see they want to hear the intercept of Mullah Omar on the phone trying to trade a dirty bomb for a bag of heroin. And until they get that, they won't believe that they're actually in the drug business. And so I've never had an experience where we've had one piece of evidence or one intercept or one interview where people go, oh, right, well, that's clear to me now. It's always these little fragmentary bits and lots of sources. And usually a lot of those sources are from the criminal community, or they're from the terrorism community. And so people go, well, how do you believe that person? They're not a credible source. And what I say is it's the preponderance of information that comes in that says this is going on, that proves it. It's not hard to figure out the networks, in my opinion. What it's hard to do is convince people of what it is that we're seeing.
One of the things that we teach, and that was one of the big insights out of the book, and that we try to emphasize, is that you can't understand illicit networks unless you understand the licit networks on which they ride or on which they rely. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. They're all hiding in plain sight. And it's really important to understand the types of businesses that they will hide inside. And we see the same thing over and over and over again in country after country. Used electronics, used cars, used tires, scrap metal, real estate. You will see illicit activity hiding, particularly in the trade of used commodities or anything that has a fungible value, fashion, jewelry, something where the value can change depending on how much the buyer and seller want to spend on it. So it makes it hard for customs officers to identify what the value of a container should be or what the value of a carton should be, and so they don't bother opening the box to look at it. It just sails through. Or it's something so nondescript that nobody would bother looking at it, like a container full of seashells or dried fish or something disgusting that nobody wants to look at.
So I'd like to give you one last chance to comment if there's anything else you'd like to add for operational planners.
Well, I think that any war fighter, when they go into or they deploy to a new region, will look at the terrain. And there was a lot of talk during the Afghan conflict and in Iraq, it was briefly fashionable to think about the human terrain. And I think that right on top of that is the economic terrain and understanding who wins and who loses if you build a well in a certain part of town when somebody in another part of town used to control the water source for that area. Understanding the terrain of these Pakistani trucking tribes that literally control billions of dollars of trade that comes all the way up from Pakistan all the way up into parts of southern Russia. So this enormous industry or economy that was almost completely overlooked by virtually everybody in Afghanistan. And then, of course, there's the corruption issue and understanding that economic terrain and how it informs political decisions that are being made. I think it's really important for planners to understand that and to try and get ahead of the issue, to try and get if we do this, it will cause X, Y, and Z impacts, and how do we offset those that might be losing money as a result of this action and make sure that everybody comes out feeling like they're at least even, if not ahead.